Hello and welcome to Twisted Roots, where we share heartfelt stories about family, courage, and community. If you enjoy tales that touch the heart and inspire the soul, we'd love for you to join our family here by subscribing to the channel. We promise to bring you moving stories with unexpected twist stories that show how deep family roots can run, even in the most trying times. Now, without further ado, let's begin our first story. It was a peaceful summer evening in a small mountain town, the kind of quiet night where crickets chirped and families slept soundly under a blanket of stars. John Miller, a widowed father, sat on his creaky front porch, enjoying a rare moment of calm. The day's work was done, his 8-year-old son David was fast asleep inside, and the world felt still. Little did John know this calm would soon be shattered by an oncoming nightmare. Around midnight, the smell of smoke threaded through the air. At first, John thought it might be a neighbor's wood stove or someone burning leaves late, but within minutes that faint smell grew into an acrid stench. The wind carried an orange glow over the treetops. The forest on the horizon was ablaze. A wildfire, fierce and hungry, was tearing through the dry brush, racing toward the cluster of homes in their community. In the distance, an alarm bell clanged and voices rose in panic. The peaceful night had erupted into chaos. John's heart pounded as he raced inside. Smoke was seeping in through the cracked window frames of the old house. He gently shook David awake. "Son, get up, now," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. David's big brown eyes went wide at the urgency in his father's tone. Outside, the once dark sky was now flickering angry red and orange, as if dawn had arrived hours too soon. John grabbed the keys to his old pickup truck, a battered green Ford that had seen better days, and a flashlight. He hustled David towards the front door. The plan was simple: get to the truck and drive as far from the encroaching fire as possible. But as John stepped onto his porch, he heard a scream that made him stop in his tracks. From the house next door came the terrified cries of children. The Thompson kids, 5-year-old Emily and 3-year-old Noah, lived there with their mother, Grace Thompson. Grace was a nurse who worked the night shift at the local clinic. On this night, the children were home with their elderly grandfather. John knew the old man had trouble with his knees and barely drove anymore. Now flames were licking up the dry grass and bushes around the Thompsons' wooden fence. Their porch light flickered in the smoky haze. The grandfather's shouts for help echoed down the road. John's stomach clenched. Fire was spreading toward both houses, faster than anyone had imagined. He had his own child to protect. Every instinct in him wanted to throw David in the truck and speed away. Yet, in that critical moment, John thought of Emily and Noah, two little lives even more vulnerable than his own son. They had no one else who could get them out in time. Grace wasn't home, and their grandfather alone might not manage to save them. He made a decision in a split second, one that would define him in the eyes of the community forever. Kneeling down, John placed his hands firmly on David's shoulders, looking him in the eye. "David, listen to me," he said, voice steady despite the fear tightening his chest. "I need to help Emily and Noah. I'm going to take them to safety first." David's eyes grew wet and scared. "But Daddy," he whimpered, "what about me?" John swallowed hard, feeling his heart tug. There was nothing more terrifying than the thought of leaving his own child even for a few minutes in the path of a wildfire. He hugged David quickly, pressing his face into the boy's soft hair for one precious second. "You're coming too, just not this very second. I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that?" he whispered. Tears streaked David's cheeks, but he nodded. John led him to the truck and opened the passenger door. "I want you to wait right here in the truck," he instructed. The safest place he could think of was actually the vehicle itself. It was old, but it might shield David from the heat and embers for a short time. Plus, John needed to use the truck to ferry the others. "Lock the doors and stay low," John said firmly. He buckled David into the single bench seat and with shaking hands plucked his own dashcam from the windshield mount and set it on the dash again, making sure it was on. In truth, he wasn't consciously thinking about the camera. It was habit to have it running whenever he drove. Tonight, that little camera would record far more than just a drive. David grabbed his father's arm. Voice trembling, "Please come back quick, Dad." John forced a smile he didn't feel. "I will, buddy. I promise. I'll be right back." He closed the truck door, giving David one last reassuring look through the window, a look he hoped hid the dread churning inside him. Then John turned and sprinted toward the Thompson house, disappearing into swirling smoke. The heat was increasing by the second. Embers floated through the air like fireflies, except these could bite and burn. John's boots pounded the dry ground as he ran next door. He found Grace's father, Mr. Thompson, on the front steps, coughing and desperately trying to shield the two children with a wet blanket against the falling ash. The old man's eyes were wide with relief when he saw John emerge from the darkness. "Thank God," Mr. Thompson wheezed. He was struggling to breathe in the smoke-filled air. Emily clung to the old man's pant leg, sobbing while little Noah wailed in confusion, arms wrapped around his grandfather's neck. The sight pierced John's heart. "We have to go now." John shouted over the roar of the approaching flames. He scooped up Emily, holding the frightened girl in one arm, and guided Mr. Thompson by the elbow with his other hand. The heat at their backs was intense. Orange light danced on the walls of the Thompson house as the fire caught the shrubbery in the yard. Noah refused to let go of his grandfather, so Mr. Thompson hobbled as quickly as he could with the toddler clinging to him. John could feel Emily's small heart hammering against his chest. "Mama, Mama," she was crying for her mother. John mustered a comforting tone. "It's okay, sweetheart, I've got you. We're going to see your mama real soon, I promise." He had no idea if that promise would hold, but he prayed it would. They hurried toward John's truck. The wildfire was almost upon them now, a wall of flame consuming trees and houses at the end of the street. Sirens wailed in the distance. Fire trucks were on their way, but the blaze was moving with terrifying speed, leaping from one dry treetop to the next. John knew they had minutes, maybe seconds, before this whole road would be engulfed. When John reached the truck, David unlocked the door from inside, coughing at the smoky air that seeped in. John helped Mr. Thompson climb into the cab as quickly as his stiff legs allowed, then lifted Noah from his arms and passed the toddler in after him. The single cab of the pickup was cramped, Mr. Thompson in the passenger seat. David scooted to the middle, holding little Noah on his lap and Emily still in John's arms. It was a tight squeeze, but they would all fit for this desperate ride. John handed Emily over to sit on her grandfather's lap. The children were crying and Mr. Thompson tried to soothe them even as his own hands shook. John's mind raced. Should he send them off and come back on foot? No, there wasn't time, and Mr. Thompson couldn't drive. He had to drive them to safety himself. "Dad," David cried out, his face pale with fear. He didn't want his father to leave him again. John's heart felt like it was being torn in two. This was the moment he dreaded, driving away without his son. But David was in the truck now, in the middle seat within arm's reach. He was coming along for this ride, not left behind entirely. John decided in that instant he would take everyone out of danger in one go. If they were lucky, maybe they could outrun the flames and circle back for anything left, but if not, at least all the children were with him. John slammed the driver's door shut, windows up. The air inside the truck was stifling and hazy with smoke, but at least free of direct embers. He turned the key in the ignition. For a heart-stopping second, the engine whined and failed. The old truck shuddered, unwilling to start. "Please, please," John begged under his breath, turning the key again. On the second try, the engine coughed to life. He could barely see out the windshield. Ash and smoke were everywhere. John flicked on the headlights and the high beams cut through a swirling haze of gray and orange. The dashcam light blinked red, quietly recording everything. David's frightened face pressed against Noah's, Emily's arms wrapped around her grandfather's neck, John's jaw set with determination as sweat and soot trickled down his temples. With a grinding of gears, the pickup lurched forward. John's hands were trembling on the steering wheel, but he held it firm. Flames licked at the edges of the road now. As they sped down the gravel lane, a fence on their left was ablaze, casting harsh light through the side windows. Emily shrieked and buried her face in her grandpa's shirt at the sight of the fire so close. Mr. Thompson murmured a prayer, voice quavering, while one hand shielded the child's eyes. John's sole focus was on the road ahead. Just get them out, get to the river or the highway, away from the trees, he told himself. The nearest safe spot was a wide field by a small river at the bottom of the hill. Fire would find little to burn there. If he could make it there, they'd have a chance. The truck's engine howled as John floored the pedal. Behind them, the night sky was bright as day from the inferno consuming their neighborhood. In the mirror, John could see David's eyes fixed backward, watching their home recede into the flames. John reached over and gently touched his son's arm. "Don't look back," he said softly. "We'll be okay." David turned his face forward and squeezed his dad's forearm in a small, shaking grip. Gravel pinged against the undercarriage as they barreled down the hill. At the bottom lay the field by the riverbank, just as John remembered. Cool air off the water hit the truck as they reached the clearing. It was like driving into a different world, the smoke thinning as they left the burning houses behind. John eased off the accelerator and brought the truck to a stop in the middle of the open field. "We're safe here, at least for now," he announced, breathing hard. For a moment, nobody spoke. In the relative quiet, only sniffles of the children and the distant roar of the wildfire could be heard. John realized his hands were still clenched to the steering wheel. He forced himself to let go, turning to check on everyone in the truck. Mr. Thompson was panting, wheezing in lungs full of smoke, but he managed a smile of relief. Noah's crying had subsided to soft whimpers, and Emily lifted her head from her grandfather's shoulder, her sobs turning to quiet hiccups. David, still pressed between Noah and Emily, looked up at his dad with a pale face. "Daddy, is our house going to burn?" he asked in a small voice. John hesitated, his throat tight. In the distance behind them, the hillside was glowing hellishly, and an orange aura hung over where their home stood. There was no way to sugarcoat it. The fire was raging through their neighborhood. I don't know," he answered honestly, voice low. "But houses can be rebuilt, David. People can't." He put a hand on his son's shoulder. "You all are safe. That's what matters right now." Mr. Thompson nodded in agreement, reaching over to grasp John's arm with a shaking hand. "You saved us," the old man rasped, tears in his eyes. "God bless you, son. You saved my grandchildren." His voice broke, and John gave his arm a reassuring squeeze. John's own heart was still not at ease. Yes, they were safe for the moment, but John's mind was already racing ahead. Grace, the children's mother, would be frantic when she found out. And what about other neighbors? The Wilsons down the road, the Lees across the street. Did they get out in time? His thoughts tumbled until one realization cut through. His home, his life's memories might already be gone. He bit his lip, pushing that fear down. There would be time for grief later. Right now he had to keep everyone calm and wait for help. Minutes later, the wail of fire engines and emergency sirens grew louder. The cavalry arrived in a blur of red and blue lights. A fire truck roared past on the nearby road, heading straight toward the flames, while a police cruiser and an ambulance pulled up by the field to tend to the evacuees. Paramedics hurried over to check on the children and the old man. John stood by his truck, legs suddenly feeling like jelly now that the adrenaline was wearing off. David clung to his father's side, one small fist gripping John's soot-stained shirt. In the chaos of arriving medics and whirling lights, John finally allowed himself a moment to feel the weight of what had happened. His hands were shaking more now than when he'd been driving. "Thank God we made it. Thank God." As a paramedic gave John and David quick check-overs, a few minor burns, nothing serious, Grace Thompson arrived, having raced from the clinic upon hearing about the fire. She ran across the field, found her children safe, and collapsed in relieved tears at John's feet, thanking him over and over. She hugged her little ones tight and even pulled John into a tearful embrace. Others from the community gathered in the field through the night as they fled the fire, all eyes filled with fear, gratitude, or grief, depending on whom they found safe. By dawn, the wildfire was under control, but the neighborhood was in ruins. The next day, once firefighters declared it safe to return. John walked up the blackened hill with David by his side. Their worst fears were confirmed. Where John's cozy house once stood was now a charred skeleton. The roof had caved in and smoke still rose from the ashen timbers. Next door, the Thompson house had also been badly damaged, though a portion still stood. Many houses on the block were completely destroyed. David squeezed his dad's hand as they surveyed the devastation. The boy's face crumpled at the sight of his burnt home, the place where he had grown up. The treehouse in the backyard, now just scorched earth. John knelt down and pulled his son into his arms. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered, voice thick. "We lost a lot, but we didn't lose each other. That's what we have to remember." David nodded into his father's chest, and they held each other in the smoky morning light. Unbeknownst to John, the dashcam in his truck had captured everything during their escape, the lens peering out into the fiery night. recording audio of John's calm reassurances and the children's cries. It even caught a glimpse of him running toward the Thompson house initially, since he had left it recording when he got out, and the tense drive through the flames. Later that day, as John was clearing debris from what used to be his front porch, a neighbor who had borrowed the truck to move some rubble returned it and handed John the small dashcam device. "You might want to see this," the neighbor said, eyes red-rimmed. John, puzzled, took the camera and replayed the footage on its tiny screen. He watched the harrowing journey unfold from an outside perspective. There he was, a figure sprinting into danger, then the hurried loading of the truck, the narrow escape through a corridor of fire. He heard himself telling David houses can be rebuilt, people can't, and saw in his own face the fear and determination he'd felt. John realized the camera had quietly recorded his family's most desperate moments. Word spread quickly around town about what John had done. At first, John waved it off. He hadn't acted to become a hero. He had done it because it was the right thing to do, because in his heart, every child was precious, not just his own. But the video found its way to social media, and one of the firefighters shared it with a local news station. Before long, the story of the father who saved his neighbor's children before rescuing his own had touched countless hearts. Some people were astonished. What kind of man risks his child's home and safety for someone else's kids? Many called him a hero, some a guardian angel of the neighborhood. John felt a bit uncomfortable with the attention, but he took it in stride, focusing on helping his community recover. In the days that followed, as the ashes cooled, something even more remarkable happened. The community rallied, neighbors, strangers from town. Even volunteers from far away who had seen the news, all came to help those who had lost homes. For John, who had quietly given so much to others, it was time to receive. Volunteers showed up with toolboxes and lumber, determined to help him rebuild the home he had sacrificed. At first, John was hesitant to accept so much help. He was used to standing on his own feet. But one evening he found Grace Thompson and Mr. Thompson at his doorstep, or what remained of it, along with a group of neighbors. Grace gently took his hand and said, "Please let us do this for you. You saved my family, now let us help you rebuild yours." John's throat tightened with gratitude. He nodded, unable to find the right words. And so, in the bright mornings and long afternoons of that summer, people came one after another to the charred lot where John's house had been. They cleared debris, laid new foundation, raised walls and a roof, all with donated materials and many willing hands. David, with a bandana around his nose to block dust, helped by picking up nails and handing tools to the workers. Determined to do his small part, even the Thompson children came by to bring cold lemonade their mother had made for everyone laboring under the sun. What grew on that lot was not just a new house, but a testament to the power of community and kindness. It wasn't fancy or large, just a modest, comfortable home taking shape exactly where the old one had stood. But every nail hammered, every board lifted, held a special meaning for those who helped. Finally, after weeks of hard work, the house was finished. On a clear autumn night, the neighborhood gathered for a housewarming unlike any other. The scent of fresh-cut timber mingled with the crisp air. The new house stood proudly, wooden siding gleaming with a fresh coat of paint. John had insisted the Thompsons be there as guests of honor. Grace arrived with Emily and Noah, each holding a dish for the potluck dinner that was laid out on fold-out tables in the yard. Mr. Thompson leaned on his cane by the porch, smiling ear to ear, healthier than he'd looked in months. The joy of this reunion seemed to have lifted his spirits. As twilight settled, John stood on the rebuilt porch with David at his side. In John's hands was a simple object, a light bulb. It was the last item to complete the home. The crowd below fell silent, huddled together in jackets. Faces expectant and warm in the glow of lanterns and string lights they had hung for the celebration. John cleared his throat, feeling a surge of emotion. He reached up and screwed the bulb into the new porch-light fixture by the front door. Taking a deep breath, John addressed everyone, his voice humble and heartfelt. "I don't have the words to thank you all." He glanced down at David, then at the Thompsons, then at the many neighbors and volunteers, familiar faces, and even some strangers who had simply been moved by his story. In each face he saw kindness and a shared strength. Tears pricked at the corners of John's eyes, but he smiled. "You rebuilt more than a house for us." You gave me and my son back a home and showed us the true meaning of community." He held up the small chain attached to the porch light. "This light isn't just for us, it's a light that represents every single one of you who lent a hand." With that, John pulled the chain. The porch light clicked on, spilling warm golden light into the darkening yard. It illuminated all the faces looking up at John, eyes shining, some with tears, some with smiles. In the soft hush that followed, John's voice came gentle and steady through the lump in his throat. "This light," he said, "belongs to many hands." And as that porch light glowed, the crowd broke into relieved laughter and applause. Some wiped away tears, others hugged their children a little tighter. David threw his arms around his father's waist, holding him close on that brand new porch. The light above them shone bright and steady, a beacon born from the generosity, love, and twisted roots of a community that had been tested by fire and emerged together on the other side. John looked out at his neighbors, his friends, his extended family gathered in the light. In that moment, he understood something deep in his soul. Houses might be built of wood and nails, but a home is built of people who care for one another, and no flame could ever destroy that. I stand where my front porch used to be. Beneath my boots, blackened timber and ash crumble softly, echoing in the quiet. No birds sing, no pines rustle, only an eerie hush and the distant crackle of fire. A twisted hunk of metal in the ash catches my eye. It's the porch light fixture. The once familiar lantern is melted, its glass long gone. Just yesterday I was on a ladder fixing this very light, unaware it would be for the last time. The sun was dipping low and golden, bathing our porch in gentle light. I had my toolbox open and a new bulb in hand, finally fixing that porch light that had been flickering all week. I climbed the ladder and eased the loose porch light fixture into place, muttering under my breath at the stubborn screws. Below me I could hear my son strumming his guitar softly on the steps. A lazy, familiar tune floated up. The scent of pine drifted through our yard as I tightened the last screw. Through the open kitchen window behind me came the aroma of dinner, garlic and rosemary. "Fixing that light at last, huh? About time," my neighbor called from across the fence. He nodded toward my son. "That boy of yours sounds pretty good," he waved as he turned away. "I'll let you two enjoy it. We'll catch up tomorrow, all right?" "Sure thing," I said. He called good night, and I answered in kind. For a moment I stood there on the porch, the new bulb casting a steady glow as dusk settled. My son picked up his tune again, fingers gently picking out a melody that mingled with the hush of evening. I leaned on the railing, watching the sky turn pink and violet. A quiet happiness warmed me from the inside. Everything was peaceful, beautifully ordinary. A soft knock at the screen door behind me made me turn. The evening breeze must have nudged it just enough to tap the frame. "Dinner's almost ready." I called to my son. I held the screen door open as we headed inside, the hinge giving a familiar creak. The door slapped shut behind us with a gentle clap. Inside, the kitchen was awash in golden light. The stew bubbled. My mouth watered at the smell, and my son laughed when his stomach gave a loud growl. I gave the pot a final stir and ruffled his hair. "Go wash up," I said. He bounded off, still humming. I stood there a moment, wooden spoon in hand, listening to his fading footsteps and feeling content. If I'd known that was our last peaceful afternoon, I might have stood there longer. I might have savored it more. Now I open my eyes, and the scent of that meal is gone. The air here carries only smoke and loss. I set down the warped porch light fixture and step through the rubble. My foot nudges something half buried in the ash, a cast iron pot split down the middle. It's the same pot I'd simmered dinner in, and we never got to eat that meal at our kitchen table. I swallow, my throat dry from soot and sorrow, and survey what remains of our home. The porch is gone. And the guitar my son loved lies in charred fragments near the steps, its metal tuning pegs warped by the heat. I crouch and pick up a piece of the fretboard, blackened and crumbling. Yesterday that wood was under his fingers, making music. Now it's nothing but a brittle remnant. I close my fist around it, feeling the charcoal bite into my palm, then set it back down. The tall pines beyond stand as scorched skeletons, their fresh green scent replaced by acrid smoke. Even the screen door lies crumpled, its mesh blackened. It's as if the scene from yesterday has been erased by flame, leaving only a charcoal sketch of what used to be. Yet in the silence, I can still hear echoes of yesterday. If I close my eyes, I can almost catch the strum of my son's guitar, a ghost of a melody. I can almost see the warm porch light flicker on, hear the creak of the screen door and my neighbor's voice, "See you tomorrow." A tear escapes down my cheek, hot and cutting through the ash on my face, and I let it fall unashamed. As much as it hurts, I feel gratitude. We made it out. My son and I are safe. The sun dips low again, casting long shadows over the ruins as I take one last look at the place we called home. It hurts to see it like this. But I remind myself that even though the porch, the kitchen, the guitar, all the physical pieces of our life are gone, something remains, love and hope, glowing like embers. I turn to my old pickup truck, its green paint dulled under a layer of ash and soot. It's dented and smoke-stained, but it carried us through the fire twice, and it's still here. So are we. I run my hand along the door, leaving trails in the ash, then climb in. As the engine rumbles to life, I take a final breath of this burnt air, tasting the bitter and the sweet of it all. In my mind, I see the porch light shining on a peaceful evening, and I hear my son's guitar once more. I hold it close. "Goodbye," I whisper, though I'm not sure if I'm speaking to the ashes or yesterday. Then I drive away. In the rearview mirror for a second, I imagine a warm light flickering on the porch one last time, bidding me farewell. The horizon pulsed with a distant orange glow flickering against the night sky. The wind had shifted hours ago, and with it came the smell of smoke, faint at first, then thicker, unmistakable. I stood on our front porch and felt a hot breeze on my face, knowing in my gut that the wildfire was no longer a faraway danger. It was coming. In that moment of dusky silence, the world held its breath with me. I began to notice the signs one by one, each a warning note in the gathering storm. First it was the sirens in the distance, their echoes rising and falling through the valley. They sounded eerily lonely, no longer just background noise, but a direct signal to every parent's heart that something was very wrong. Next came the animals. A jackrabbit bounded across our yard, followed by 2 frightened deer that leapt through the brush beyond our fence. When wild creatures flee past your doorstep, you realize you're in nature's way. Finally, the power gave a nervous flicker. The lights in our living room sputtered twice, then steadied. My son's eyes met mine in the sudden dimness. Neither of us spoke, but we both understood. It was time to go. Inside, we moved through our home in a focused rush, grabbing what little we could. How do you pack a life into a few bags? In the chaos, my hands acted on their own. Important documents, a change of clothes, first aid kit, into the duffel they went. I caught a glimpse of the framed photograph on the mantel as I passed. My late wife smiling, our son a chubby-cheeked toddler on her lap. The thought of losing that memory to flames tightened my throat. I gently took the photo out of its frame and slipped it between shirts in the bag. My son darted to his room and emerged with his backpack stuffed and his favorite old stuffed bear under one arm. Seeing that little bear worn, one eye missing, made my chest ache. He hadn't slept with it in years, but tonight he clung to it. Even at 13, in a moment like this, a child reaches for comfort. I gave him a reassuring nod and tried to smile. We worked in silence except for the ticking clock on the wall and the distant howl of the wind. Each tick felt heavier than the last. Stay calm, I told myself, keep it together for him. I forced my voice to be steady as I said, "Okay, let's load these in the truck." He nodded, determined. Though I saw the quiver in his lip before he turned away, there were things we were leaving behind, so many things. The piano my son practiced on every evening, the drawings on the fridge, the heirloom rocking chair in the corner. In that instant, I realized none of that truly mattered as long as we had each other. It's a strange clarity that comes when you're standing in the path of a wildfire. You see what's worth carrying and what you must let go. Just as we hauled our bags to the front door, I heard a pounding, urgent, frantic. For a split second, my heart leapt, thinking maybe it's help. I swung the door open to find 2 small figures in the dusky light. Our neighbor's children stood on my doorstep, faces streaked with tears and ash. The older one, a girl of about 8, was holding her little brother's hand. He couldn't have been more than 5. They were both trembling. "Mr. Than," the girl stammered. I dimly noted that she used my name, recognizing me through her panic. "Mom and Dad, they are not home. We didn't know where else to go." Her voice broke at the last word. I dropped to one knee and opened my arms, and they rushed forward without hesitation. The little boy buried his face in my shoulder, his thin body shaking with sobs. The girl pressed against my other side, clinging to my shirt. It's okay, I whispered, trying to soothe them while my own heart was pounding. I looked over their heads into the darkening street. The air was thicker now. I could see distant embers swirling like fireflies caught in a whirlwind. Where were their parents? Perhaps they'd gone into town that afternoon or were stuck on the other side of the evacuation lines. I had no way of knowing. All I knew was that these two terrified children were here alone, and I was suddenly responsible for more than just my own family. My son hovered in the doorway, his backpack still slung on one shoulder. He watched in silence, eyes wide at seeing his playmates so frightened. I saw him swallow hard, then step forward to gently pat the little boy's back. "You're safe here," my son murmured softly, echoing my own thoughts. In that moment I felt a surge of pride in him and a surge of fear at what I knew I had to do next. "Come inside," I urged, guiding the children out of the smoky air and into our living room. The moment we shut the door, I knelt to the kids' eye level. "Listen. I'm going to get you to safety," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. The girl's eyes were glued to mine. She was old enough to sense the seriousness. "Have you heard from Mom or Dad?" She sniffled and shook her head, their phones not answering. I was babysitting him. Her small voice faltered. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing coming here. Your parents would be proud of you." Outside, I heard a distant crash, maybe a tree limb felled by the advancing fire or wind. Time was running out. I stood up and glanced at my son. His face was pale, but he gave me a tiny nod as if already understanding what I was about to say. The plan forming in my head was equal parts necessity and nightmare. Our old pickup truck was sturdy but had a single bench seat. It could fit at most 3 people squeezed tight in the cab. 4, especially with 2 little ones who needed to be held and soothed. No, I couldn't safely drive all of us out in one go, and putting any of the children in the bed of the truck with burning ash in the air was out of the question. I felt a knot in my stomach as I realized what I must do. "Son," I said slowly, fighting to keep my voice from shaking, "I'm going to take these 2 to the evacuation center down at the church first. It's just a few minutes down the hill." His eyes widened and he opened his mouth to protest, but I continued quickly, trying to sound confident. "I'll come right back for you, I promise. I'll be back before you know it." My son's mouth closed. He looked at the neighbor kids, the little boy now quietly hiccuping tears, the girl holding my hand tightly, and then back at me. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the fear of being left versus the understanding of why. He was always a smart kid. For a moment, my brave boy became a little child again in my eyes. I saw the toddler from that photo on the mantel, afraid of the dark. I stepped forward and pulled him into a tight hug. "I need you to stay here where it's safe for just a little while," I whispered into his ear. I hoped he couldn't hear my heart hammering. "Stay low, maybe in the kitchen where there's tile, away from windows. What a blanket to have with you just in case." He nodded against my shoulder. I pulled back to look at him, placing my hands on either side of his face so I could be sure he was really meeting my gaze. His eyes were wet but fiercely determined. "You come back, Dad," he said, voice cracking. "You promise?" I felt something break and mend simultaneously in my chest. "I promise," I replied, my own voice barely more than a breath. It was the hardest promise I'd ever had to make. There were no more words. We all understood the stakes without saying them. I grabbed an old quilt from the couch and gently wrapped it around the neighbor boy's shoulders. He had stopped crying but was clinging to my shirt with one tiny fist. The girl still held my hand, her eyes fixed on me like I was the only solid thing left in her world. I had to be solid for all of them. I picked up my car keys from the hook by the door, and we moved as a small, determined unit. My son walked us out to the porch. He stood there, a lone silhouette against the quavering light, as I carefully helped the 2 younger kids into the truck's cab. The girl sat in the middle beside me, holding her brother on her lap tightly as I buckled the single frayed seatbelt around all 3 of us as best I could. I looked up at my boy one last time. He raised his hand in a weak wave. I could see tears on his cheeks, glinting in the ominous light. I forced a smile I didn't feel and said, "Lock the door and sit tight. I'll be back real soon." My voice was too cheerful, too bright, the way you lie to a child to keep them calm. He nodded, trying to smile back. I saw him straighten his shoulders, trying to be brave for me. With a deep breath, I turned the key and the old engine coughed to life. The pickup's headlights cut 2 feeble beams into the smoky darkness ahead. I reversed down the driveway as carefully as I could, never taking my eyes off the rearview mirror. In it, I caught a final glimpse of my son standing small and alone on the porch, the orange glow painting his outline. Then the road curved and he was gone from sight, swallowed by the night and smoke. A sharp ache spread through my chest, but there was no time to wallow in it. I had to focus. I had precious cargo with me. The tires skidded on loose gravel as I swung onto the main road, heading downhill toward safety. Ash drifted through the air like gray snow, and I had to switch the wipers on to clear the accumulating film from the windshield. The two children clung to each other, curled under the quilt against my side. I could feel the older girl shaking. "It's okay, kiddos," I murmured, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "Almost there. We'll see your mom and dad soon, I'm sure." I wasn't sure of anything, except that the road ahead was getting more perilous by the second. Embers danced across the pavement in front of us, and the smoke turned the high beams into an opaque fog. I leaned forward over the steering wheel, squinting to make out the asphalt and praying silently under my breath. The farther we drove, the darker the world became behind us. As we rounded a bend, I could just make out the faint glow of the church lights through the haze ahead the evacuation center. A sense of relief fought with a surge of dread inside me. Relief that these children would be safe. Dread at the journey I'd have to make back alone. Into the inferno to keep my promise. My fingers tightened on the wheel, knuckles white and aching. Over the pounding of my heart, I whispered a plea to anyone listening. "Please let my boy be okay. Please give me the strength to do this." Up ahead, figures with flashlights were signaling, guiding the few of us driving out. I pulled up and immediately a firefighter opened the passenger door. "Thank God," she said gently. Peeling the little ones out from under the quilt and into her arms, the girl resisted for a moment, her small hand clenching mine. "It's all right," I told her, finally letting my voice reflect the emotion I'd been holding back. "You're safe now. I'll find your parents. Go with her." She nodded, eyes big and trusting, and then they were gone, whisked into the care of those in yellow helmets and masks, disappearing toward the bright doors of the church hall. I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled and looked back the way we'd come. The sky above the road glowed an ugly, angry red. This was only the first trip. I had to go back. My son was waiting for me, and a promise is a promise. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I threw the truck into gear once more. The firefighter slapped the hood lightly. "Go, get out while you can," she shouted. But I just shook my head, already turning the wheel back towards the hellish glow. "I've got to go back," I said, though she probably couldn't hear me. Without another second's hesitation, I pressed down on the gas. My headlights carved a path into the darkness I had just escaped from, illuminating falling ash and swirling smoke. Every instinct screamed to stay in the safe light of the refuge, but a stronger voice, the voice of a father's love, drowned it out. The old pickup rumbled determinedly beneath me as I headed up the hill once more. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not with fear now, but with resolve. In my mind, I pictured my son's face waiting in the dark, trusting that I would return as I promised. I flicked on the high beams and fixed my eyes ahead, where the road vanished into the oncoming night. My heart pounded out a steady rhythm of courage and fear intertwined. And so, with the world on fire around me and hope burning strangely bright within me, I drove my old pickup truck into the dark, smoke-thick night. I had just dropped off the Thompson children at the community shelter. A dull ache of fear still knotted in my stomach. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, engine quiet, night silent. Then, after a heartbeat of hesitation, I turned the truck around. The road back was treacherous. Wildfire flames licked at the edges of the highway on both sides. Smoke was so thick it felt like a wall, blurring the world outside. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel of yellow through the darkness and ash. I pressed on the gas, palms clenched tight on the wheel. I felt fear, the real kind, with a tight knot in my throat that made it hard to breathe. But I kept driving, because being afraid wasn't going to stop me. To be afraid and still do what must be done, that is bravery, that is love. My mind raced with doubt. What am I doing? Am I crazy? All around me was chaos, burning fields. Glass-fogged windows and the roar of flames in the wind, but I refused to turn back. I had made up my mind even before doubt could whisper again. For love, I went anyway. At that moment, I realized something urgent. My son, my boy, I needed to get back to him. As I approached our street, I saw our house looming in the smoky haze. It stood there, shrouded in orange darkness, the porch light still glowing stubbornly despite the flickering power. The little bulb was a beacon in the inferno. My heart froze. His small figure was on the porch, lit by that faltering light. Even through the smoke, I could see the worry in his eyes. For a moment, everything went still. The engine's hum felt distant. It was just me and him. I killed the engine and sprang out. Smoke billowed around me as I ran across the yard. The heat slapped at my face, but I barely noticed. I felt only the weight of his gaze. Without a word, I pulled him into a tight embrace. He trembled against me. "Daddy," he whimpered. That one word carried a world of fear. "I'm here, buddy, I'm here," I whispered back, holding him as if I could shield him from 1,000 fires. His small arms wrapped around my neck, gripping tightly as if his life depended on it. I smelled smoke on his hair and felt the pounding of his heart against mine. In that intense silence, I realized how much I needed him just as he needed me. He nodded, tears streaking his cheeks, but a brave look in his eyes. "I'm okay," he said quietly. I knew we didn't have a second to lose. "We have to go," I told him. He nodded again and we ran back to the truck together. I started the engine and we eased onto the road. The world outside was a moving nightmare of orange and black. Inside the cab, the heat was intense, the air thick and stale. I opened my jacket and took a deep breath, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. My son sat next to me, gazing out at the hellish landscape. His face was pale, chin up, eyes fierce with a mix of fear and determination. I glanced at him and offered a small, reassuring smile. "It's okay," I said softly. "I've got you." He nodded once and I squeezed his hand. "You're doing great," I told him, words meant to comfort us both. "Just breathe with me, in, out." Slowly together we took steady breaths. Ash drifted in through the cracked window, but we kept it together. For a while, only flames danced at the edges of the road, tall orange columns reaching for the sky. Smoke billowed around us. And our headlights were like giant yellow eyes piercing the night. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead. Every mile felt like an eternity, but each one brought us closer to safety. I tried to lighten the mood with a silly memory. "Remember when we got lost in the woods?" I whispered. "You were so upset. I asked you your favorite color and you said red." He blinked through his tears and managed a weak smile. "It still is red," he said. "Right," I smiled. "Favorite color is still red, but tonight we'll paint with a different kind of red, the red of fireworks tomorrow." He giggled softly through his tears at that. We kept driving, inching forward. The road twisted through darkness until finally ahead there was nothing but black, the edge of the fire zone, our way out of the nightmare. And then suddenly we burst through the smoke. A sudden silence fell as we emerged into the cool night. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to the air. But above us the stars were shining. My headlights revealed a quiet road ahead, untouched by the orange glow behind us. I turned to look at my son. He was slumped in his seat, eyes closed, exhausted. Gently I took his hand in both of mine. We just sat there for a moment, letting the silence speak. We had made it. Only the sound of our breathing filled the truck. In that stillness, gratitude washed over me. "In this moment, I am so grateful for you for life. For this quiet night," I whispered. He opened his eyes and looked at me. "Me too, Daddy," he murmured. The road ahead was calm and dark, leading us away from danger. We drove on, leaving the fire behind us. We were filled with hope and gratitude. The night after the fire, silence felt heavier than the roar of the flames. At the shelter, families huddled together, speaking in whispers, their faces lit only by the glow of emergency lanterns. Children clutched blankets, some slept, others stared into the distance. My son leaned against me, his small frame exhausted, but I could feel the way he pressed closer, needing reassurance that I was real, that we were still together. Every now and then he'd shift in his sleep, murmuring fragments of words I couldn't catch. I smoothed his hair and tried to steady my own heart. I should have felt relief. We were alive, we had made it out. But instead my chest burned with a new weight, the knowledge of what we had lost and what choices still lay ahead. Word spread quickly that the fire had swallowed whole neighborhoods. My street, my home, was gone, and yet even as grief gnawed at me, I knew my decision wasn't finished. The community center buzzed with confusion, volunteers organizing food, neighbors searching for missing loved ones, officials posting maps of the fire's spread. Someone asked for drivers with sturdy vehicles to help ferry people and supplies back and forth. I looked down at my hands. They still trembled from gripping the wheel through smoke and flame. My truck was battered, its paint blistered, windshield fogged with soot, but it still ran. And suddenly, a thought cut through the haze. I could go back. The fire wasn't over. There were still people out there. But then I looked at my boy. His head rested against my chest, his breath slow and steady. The ash still clung to his hair, his shoes still smelled of smoke. He had already waited for me once, alone on that porch-light flickering against the end of the world. Could I ask him to wait again? It felt like standing at a crossroads no map could show. On one side, duty to neighbors, strangers, a community that needed every willing hand. On the other, duty to my son, the only family I had left who needed me not just alive, but present. I closed my eyes and let the weight of it settle. A father's life is full of choices that seem ordinary, what job to take, where to live, when to scold, and when to hug. But some choices arrive like lightning, carving a line that will split your life in two. This was one of them. When morning came, I stood outside the shelter and watched the horizon. Smoke still curled against the pale sky, painting the dawn in streaks of gray. My son stood beside me, his small hand gripping mine. "Are we going home, Dad?" he asked quietly. The question broke me. There was no home to return to, only ashes. But in his eyes I saw something beyond walls and roofs. He wasn't asking about a house, he was asking about us. I knelt down so we were face to face. My voice shook, but I told him the truth. Home is wherever we are together. That hasn't changed, it never will. And then I made my decision. I would stay by his side. I would help the community in whatever way I could, but not at the cost of leaving him behind again. No matter what came next, my son would not face the fire or the aftermath alone. As I pulled him into an embrace, I whispered a vow I knew I would carry to my last breath. We survived the fire once, and together we'll survive what comes after. The wind shifted again, cool this time, carrying away the smell of smoke. For the first time in days, I felt I could breathe. This was the decision that would define me, not just as a neighbor or a survivor, but as a father. Morning broke pale and fragile, like a sheet of glass that could shatter with the slightest touch. The shelter still buzzed with exhaustion, mothers whispering to children, neighbors trading rumors, volunteers scribbling names on clipboards. For a while I simply sat, watching my son stir awake under a donated blanket. But then a call came. "We need drivers, we need trucks." I looked out at the parking lot where my old pickup sat, blackened by soot but still alive, humming with the stubbornness of machines built to last longer than their owners. My hands clenched, remembering the wheel beneath them, the flames in the mirror, the way my son's eyes searched for me on that porch. Still, when the coordinator asked, I raised my hand. The task was simple in words, daunting in truth: ferry families from the burned-out neighborhoods to the shelter. The roads were unstable, smoke still drifted, and fire crews warned us to drive fast and never stop. I helped load the first group, an elderly couple, their daughter, and a dog trembling in the girl's arms. Their faces were pale masks of shock, the kind carved by fire's cruel hand. I offered a smile, but it felt small, thin. My son tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, are you going again?" I bent to his height, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Just one trip. I'll be back before you know it. You'll wait here safe, I promise." He searched my eyes, as though trying to read whether a promise could survive a wildfire. Finally, he nodded. The engine coughed, then roared alive. As I pulled out of the lot, the weight of 4 lives pressed against my shoulders, heavier than any cargo I had ever carried. The road was lined with ash like snow that would never melt. Blackened trees reached skyward, skeletal fingers pointing to a heaven that seemed deaf to their prayers. The closer we drew to the old neighborhoods, the thicker the smoke became, smearing the sun into a pale orange disk. The elderly man in the back seat whispered, "This was our street." His wife clutched his hand, eyes fixed on the ruin beyond the glass. I didn't look too long. It felt like staring at an open wound. I thought of my own son waiting back at the shelter. The last time I left him, it was under the porch light, with fire snapping at his heels. Now it was under the hum of fluorescent bulbs, safe but watching the door like a hawk for my return. Duty pulled me in 2 directions. My heart ached with the same old question: how do you choose between your own and everyone else's? But as I glanced in the rearview mirror at the trembling family, I realized sometimes you don't choose. Sometimes life chooses for you, and all you can do is keep driving. We reached the shelter at last. Volunteers rushed to help the family out of the truck, their voices soft but firm, guiding them like shepherds with lost sheep. I sat there for a moment, My hand still gripping the wheel, then I saw him, my boy, standing at the entrance, craning his neck, eyes scanning every vehicle. When he spotted me, he broke into a run. I stepped out just as he collided into me, arms wrapping around my waist. I felt his breath hitch as he whispered, "You came back." I held him tighter than words could manage. "Always," I said, "that was the first run, the first of many," but in that moment, with his arms around me, I understood every trip I took into the ashes was not just for strangers, it was for him too, to show him what it meant to carry others when the world was burning. And so the story of the first ride became more than just a drive through ruin. It became the proof that sometimes survival isn't enough. Sometimes you have to help others survive too. By the time the second trip ended, my body felt like a thread pulled too tight, fraying at the edges. I had ferried another family, a mother clutching her baby, an older brother dragging along a plastic bag of what little they'd managed to save. Each time I pulled into the shelter parking lot, I caught sight of my son's face, waiting for me like a lighthouse on the shore. But I knew it couldn't end with just one ride or two. The need was endless, and so I kept going. The third trip blurred into the fourth, then the fifth. Each road was the same, lined with smoldering trees, choked with smoke that clawed its way into my throat. My truck rattled with every mile as though begging for mercy. I ignored it. The faces inside my cab changed, children whose eyes had already seen too much, parents who whispered apologies to them, grandparents who sat in stunned silence. But the fear was always the same, a silent passenger on every ride. Somewhere between trips, my muscles began to ache like stone. My vision swam in and out, the steering wheel heavy as lead. Once at a red glow in the distance, I nearly closed my eyes, lulled by the rhythm of the engine. But then I pictured my boy standing at the shelter door, straining his neck for me. That image snapped me awake. It's strange how exhaustion and determination live side by side. My body begged to stop, but something deeper refused. Every trip was a choice. Yes, but it also felt like a duty etched into my bones. I remembered my father's words long ago. "Son, a man isn't measured by how much he saves for himself, but how much he's willing to give when there's nothing left." And so I gave mile after mile, trip after trip. Each family I delivered was another weight lifted, though my own burden grew heavier. Every time I returned, my boy would be there. Sometimes he'd run and fling his arms around me. Other times he'd just nod, his little chin held firm as if trying to be brave for both of us. "Are you done now?" he asked after my sixth run. His voice was small, hopeful. I crouched down, sweat stinging my eyes. "Almost, buddy, just one more." He frowned, but didn't argue. He simply pressed something into my hand, his lucky marble, chipped at the edges, blue swirling with white. "For you," he said, "so you come back." I swallowed hard and tucked it into my pocket. "I'll bring it back to you," I promised. That seventh trip was the hardest. Smoke was thicker, the road more crowded with panicked cars, some abandoned, some overturned. I gripped the marble in my pocket like a talisman, whispering silent prayers I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. But then, like stepping out of a nightmare, I saw the lights of the shelter again. I rolled into the lot, brakes screeching, passengers tumbling out into waiting arms. And there he was, my boy, running full tilt toward me, eyes wide with relief. I stepped out, knees weak. But I stood tall enough for him to leap into my arms. His little arms locked around my neck, and I could feel his heartbeat hammering against my chest. We were safe together. For now, that was enough. That night, as I collapsed onto a cot beside him, I realized something. Safe is never a permanent word. It is only borrowed, held for a fleeting moment. And the price of reaching it was written into every mile of those trips, every drop of sweat, every whispered prayer. But for the first time since the fire began, as he drifted to sleep beside me, I let myself believe we had found a place where hope could rest, however briefly. The shelter had become a place of restless waiting. Families clung to each other, volunteers shuffled papers, and the air was thick with the smell of smoke that never seemed to wash away. I should have been relieved. I had brought so many to safety, including my boy, but relief is a fickle guest. It never stays long. Word spread that there were still pockets of people stranded, an old man refusing to leave his home, a mother too weak to carry her children far. Neighbors trapped by roads blocked with fallen trees. Each whisper was like a hand tugging at my sleeve, pulling me back toward the fire. It was near midnight when a woman approached me. Her clothes were stained with ash, her voice cracked from smoke. She clasped my arm as if it were the last rope left to hold. My father, he's still there. He wouldn't come when we begged him. Please, someone has to try again." Her eyes were wild with desperation, and I knew what she was asking before the words fully left her mouth. I felt my son's gaze on me from across the room. He was sitting on a cot, his lucky marble rolling in his hand. He didn't speak, but his silence was louder than any cry. "Don't go back." I sat for a long moment, torn in half. Part of me screamed that I had done enough, that no one could ask more from a man who had already driven through fire, who had risked everything to save strangers and nearly lost his son in the process. But another part, the part shaped by my father's voice, by the weight of neighbors' hands pulling me through my own hardships, told me that enough was never enough when a life still hung in the balance. I rose, every muscle heavy with fatigue, and nodded. "Show me where." The truck coughed to life again, its engine a tired soldier answering the call. The night was darker now, the smoke thicker, the fire unpredictable as the wind shifted in cruel, sudden gusts. I gripped the wheel tighter than before. This wasn't just another trip. This was a return into the very heart of the blaze, a gamble where the odds were paper thin. The woman sat beside me, clutching a photograph of her father. She whispered prayers under her breath, though the words trembled as if she wasn't sure heaven was listening. We drove past the place where flames had already eaten whole blocks of homes. The road twisted, littered with branches, glowing embers snapping under the tires. At one point, a gust sent sparks scattering across the hood, and for a second it looked like the stars themselves were falling onto us. Fear gnawed at me, sharp and cold, but I remembered what I had told my son, that home wasn't walls or roofs, but the act of holding on to each other. That memory became my anchor. At last, we reached the street the woman had described. Her father's house stood like a stubborn shadow against the inferno, its porch light somehow still glowing, flickering, fragile, but there. I braked hard, heart pounding. The flames were advancing, smoke curling into every corner. I knew that if we didn't move fast, both the house and the man inside would vanish into the blaze. The woman leapt out, shouting, her voice breaking into the night. I followed, lungs burning with each breath. And as we approached the door, I realized this wasn't just about one man or one house. It was about the choice to keep going back, even when the fire threatened to consume more than wood and stone. It was about proving to my son, to myself, that when the world turns to ash, we still owe each other the effort of one more try. The old man stood on his porch, stubborn as stone, his frame silhouetted against a wall of fire that crept closer with every gust of wind. His daughter clung to his arm, pleading, her voice cracking like dry wood. "I won't leave my house," he rasped. "This roof, these walls, they're all I've got left." I understood. Homes are more than lumber and nails. They are the museums of our lives, each wall carrying echoes of laughter and arguments. Each step worn by countless days of ordinary living. To walk away feels like burying yourself alive, but the fire had no patience for sentiment. I stepped forward, my voice firm though my throat burned with smoke. "Sir, if you stay, the fire will take more than wood. It will take you, and your daughter will never forgive herself for leaving you here." His eyes glistened, torn between pride and fear. For a long moment, silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of burning timber in the distance. Then at last his shoulders sagged. He nodded once, as if surrendering not to me but to the truth he could no longer deny. We hurried him into the truck, the flames now painting the night sky a furious red. I gunned the engine, the tires spitting gravel as we pulled away. The road back felt narrower than ever, flames licking the edges, smoke swallowing whole sections in a choking haze. The old man coughed, his daughter whispering prayers into the crook of her sleeve. And me, I drove with a calm that didn't feel like mine. Each mile was borrowed courage, fueled by the marble in my pocket and the thought of my boy waiting at the shelter. At last, the wall of smoke broke open, and ahead lay the lights of the shelter, small, steady like stars refusing to be snuffed out. Relief flooded the cab. The daughter clutched her father's hand. He closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his soot-streaked cheek. When we rolled into the lot, people rushed forward. Voices rose in astonishment. No one believed anyone else was left behind in that street. Yet here he was, the last man out, and then I saw him. My boy standing at the doorway, his shoulders tense, his face pale. He had been watching, waiting, counting every trip I made. When our eyes met, something passed between us, fear, relief, anger, and pride all tangled together. He didn't run to me this time. He just stood there, his jaw set, as if weighing what it meant to have a father who couldn't stop risking himself for others. I stepped down from the truck, knees shaking, but I walked toward him anyway. The old man and his daughter were safe, yes, but the question in my son's eyes cut deeper than any flame, and I knew the hardest fire I would ever face wasn't the one out there in the forest. It was the one smoldering quietly in his young heart. The fire may have loosened its grip on the hills, but inside the shelter it clung to us still, coiling in our lungs, smearing our skin, weighing on our hearts. People whispered about who made it out and who did not, names spoken like fragile glass that could shatter if carried too loudly. I sat on the cot, my boy leaning against me, both of us too drained to speak. That's when the news arrived, not shouted, not even spoken clearly, but carried on the hush of trembling lips. A volunteer with soot still in his hair moved from group to group, reading names off a crumpled list. Some names brought cheers, others sighs of relief, and then there were the pauses, the hollow spaces where a name hung unanswered. I braced myself, praying not to hear a neighbor, a friend, anyone whose face I knew, but prayers don't bend fire. The truth was inevitable. The Johnsons' old barn gone, the Ramirez family's goats, they hadn't survived. And then came the hardest blow, Mr. and Mrs. Clark, the elderly couple who always left jars of peaches on our porch every summer. Their house had collapsed before rescuers could reach them. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I could taste the sweetness of those peaches, feel the rough glass jar in my hand. Memory has a cruel way of making loss sharper. Beside me my boy whispered, but they were always so kind. His voice cracked, and he turned his face into my shoulder. I had no answer for him, only silence. It's one thing to face fire with your own life. It's another to face your child's questions with nothing but ash in your hands. How do you explain that goodness doesn't guarantee survival, that kindness isn't armor? I wanted to tell him something noble, something that might make the loss bearable, but all I could say was, sometimes the fire takes more than it should. He nodded, though he didn't understand, and maybe I didn't either. As the night wore on, the shelter grew quieter. Families curled together on cots, some weeping softly, others simply staring into the dark. We were alive, yes, but survival always asks for payment. That night the cost was written on our faces, soot, tears, lines carved deep from fear, and in the empty spaces left by those who would never walk through the shelter doors. I held my son tighter, feeling the weight of both relief and grief. Safety had been bought, but not for everyone, and that truth would follow us long after the flames were gone. Morning crept into the shelter like a guest no one had invited. The air was heavy, not with smoke this time, but with silence. Families sat in small clusters, holding hands, sharing pieces of bread, whispering about who was safe and who was not. I sat slumped in a folding chair, my son asleep against my chest, when a voice broke through the hush. Hey, this thing was recording. A volunteer stood near the wall, holding up a small memory card. He had been fiddling with my old Dashcam, one I had nearly forgotten about. The device had always been more habit than necessity, mounted on the cracked windshield of my truck, recording countless uneventful drives to the store, to school, to work. But this time it hadn't captured the ordinary. It had captured everything. They connected the Dashcam to a battered laptop, and suddenly the shelter was no longer quiet. The screen flickered, then lit up with fire, the night roads. The orange glow, the headlights piercing through the smoke. My voice, steady, low, was heard giving instructions, urging frightened passengers to hold on, to trust me. Then came the cries of children, the frantic prayers, the coughs of the old man. The camera shook with every bump, every swerve, and yet it never looked away. It showed the fire as it truly was, not as rumor, not as memory, but as living proof. One by one, people gathered around, drawn like moths to the glow of the screen. Some gasped, others wept quietly. Parents pulled their children closer, seeing their own terror reflected back at them. When the footage ended, no one spoke right away. The silence was different now, not heavy, but awestruck. A teenager wiped her eyes. That's my little brother in the back seat. The woman whose father I had rescued covered her mouth with her hands, whispering, "It's all there, every second." And then someone said the words that changed everything. "People need to see this." The volunteer nodded. "I can upload it. Folks out there, they don't know what really happened. They need to see what we've been through. They need to see what you did." I shifted uneasily in my chair. I hadn't driven into the fire for recognition or thanks or headlines. I did it because it was what needed to be done. Yet the footage didn't belong to me alone. It belonged to every face. Every voice caught in those trembling frames, so I gave a quiet nod. Show them. That morning, while the fires still smoldered in the hills, the footage began its second journey, not on wheels this time, but through the invisible roads of the internet. It spread from one screen to another, carrying with it not just images of flame and fear, but a reminder that even in the fiercest blaze there are moments when ordinary hands hold extraordinary courage. And that was the moment I realized the story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to all of us. By the next morning, the shelter's weary silence had been replaced by a hum of whispers, each one carrying news faster than the smoke still drifting across the hills. The Dashcam video, our video, was no longer just ours. It had slipped into the veins of the wider world. At first, it was small. A local news outlet picked it up, embedding shaky frames of my old truck barreling down roads lit like furnaces. They described it as an ordinary father making impossible choices. People shared the link with captions like, "Would you have done the same?" and "Heroes still live among us." Then a regional station aired the full footage. Reporters didn't add dramatic music, they didn't need to. The raw sound, the children's frightened breaths, the roar of fire was enough. From there, the story leapt onto social media. Strangers thousands of miles away watched as if they were in the passenger seat, gripping the dashboard. Hashtags bloomed like wildflowers after rain. Into the fire, everyday hero, Dashcam courage. Within hours, the clip had millions of views. Comments poured in, veterans comparing it to battlefields, parents saying they wept imagining their own children, neighbors promising to do more for each other. I wasn't online to see it firsthand, but others showed me the messages. This man didn't just save lives, he reminded us what community means. By the second day, trucks began arriving at the shelter, not carrying flames, but supplies. Food, blankets, toys for the children. People who had never stepped foot in our town showed up, saying they had seen the video and couldn't stay away. Even the firefighters, hardened men and women who had stared down infernos their whole lives, squeezed my hand and said, "What you did, that was different." And all the while I kept thinking, I didn't do this alone. The camera may have pointed at me, but it captured all of us, the neighbors, the children, the stubborn old man who finally chose to live. Every soul in that truck carried courage with them. The video did more than tell a story. It lit a fuse of compassion. Where before there was only loss, now there was momentum. People began asking not just what had burned, but what could be rebuilt. And for the first time since the fire began, I felt something stir in me beyond exhaustion and grief. It was the quiet certainty that out of the ashes, something larger than any one of us was beginning to take shape. The fire had stolen walls, memories, and the rhythm of daily life, but it hadn't stolen people's hearts. What began as a stream of strangers bringing food and blankets soon turned into something bigger, a wave of hands carrying hammers, nails, and hope. It started with a single pickup truck pulling into the empty lot where my home once stood. A man I'd never met stepped down, his clothes spattered with paint, his hands thick with calluses. He said only one thing. "Do we start?" By noon, 3 more trucks rolled in. By sunset, the empty lot was no longer empty. They came from all directions, neighbors, church groups, carpenters, even college kids who had only seen the Dashcam video online. Some wore work boots, others showed up in sneakers, their palms blistering as they learned to swing a hammer for the first time. Each person brought something: lumber, shingles, paint cans, extension cords, and for the first time in weeks, the smell of smoke was replaced by the smell of sawdust. My son stood beside me, wide-eyed, as the skeleton of a new frame rose where the ashes had been. "Dad," he whispered, "they're building our house." I put a hand on his shoulder. "No," I said softly, "they're building our house, all of ours." The worksite became a chorus of sound, hammers striking, saws buzzing, laughter cutting through fatigue. Strangers shared sandwiches on overturned paint buckets. Kids passed nails like they were precious coins. And when the sun dipped low, floodlights powered by a borrowed generator kept the work alive. Each evening, someone would bring a guitar or a pot of chili, and the site turned into a gathering. Grief hadn't vanished, but it had been joined by something new, resilience stitched together by community. I would catch myself standing still sometimes, just watching as people who owed me nothing bent their backs for my family. Watching as walls climbed higher each day. Watching as my son learned what it looked like when the world refused to give up on you. And I thought, fire may reduce wood to ash, but people can raise hope from ashes. Weeks passed, and the house began to take shape, not a copy of the old one, but something entirely new, infused with the fingerprints of hundreds. Every board held a story, every nail was driven with love, and with each passing day, I understood this wasn't simply about a home being rebuilt. It was about lives being mended, about proving that loss doesn't have the last word. Day came quietly, almost shyly, as if it knew how much weight it carried. After weeks of hammering, lifting, painting, and praying, the house stood finished at last. It didn't look exactly like the one we had lost. The siding was lighter, the roof a little steeper, the porch wider. But in its bones was something the old house never had, the fingerprints of 100 strangers, neighbors, and friends who had turned loss into labor. Every board held the rhythm of volunteer hands. Every wall hummed with voices that had sung while they worked. Walking through the front door for the first time, I ran my hand along the frame. The wood felt smooth but alive, as if it carried the pulse of all those who had touched it. My son followed close behind me, his steps slow, almost reverent. He whispered, "It feels different, Dad, like it's stronger." I smiled. "It is stronger, son, because it was built with more than wood and nails. It was built with love." The yard was filled with people that evening, volunteers who had driven nails, neighbors who had cooked meals, children who had carried tools back and forth. They didn't stand as outsiders looking in. They stood as family, waiting to see the house shine for the first time. Tables were set with casseroles and pies, guitars leaned against folding chairs, and lanterns swung from tree branches. It wasn't just a housewarming. It was a celebration of survival, of unity, of the belief that what fire takes, people can return tenfold. As the sun sank low, someone handed me the switch for the porch light. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. I looked at the faces before me, each one carrying soot, sweat, or scars from the weeks behind us. "This house," I began, my voice breaking a little, "doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to all of you. Every nail, every brush stroke, every blister, your hands are in these walls." Then I flipped the switch. The porch light glowed, soft at first, then steady, cutting through the dark. People clapped, some wept, others simply stood in silence, their faces lit by the warm glow. My son squeezed my hand, his eyes wide. I whispered words I hadn't planned, but which felt truer than anything I'd ever said. "This light is not mine, it is the light of many hands." And in that glow, for the first time since the fire, I felt at home again. When the porch light flickered on that night, it was more than a bulb breaking the darkness. It was a signal, soft but steady, that carried beyond my small yard and into the world beyond. Neighbors who had helped rebuild stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces illuminated by the warm glow. Children laughed, chasing one another across the grass, their shadows stretching long under the new light. The air smelled of fresh paint and sawdust, but also of food shared, sweat poured, and tears dried together. That porch light was no longer just for me or my son. It was for everyone who had bent down to lift us up. It stood as proof that when fire tries to tear us apart, people can still piece each other back together. Word of the light traveled as quickly as the Dashcam video had weeks before. Local papers carried the photograph of my rebuilt porch, the headline simple but powerful, "From Ashes to Light." Soon, towns from miles away began holding their own gatherings, stringing lights across porches, barns, and churches as symbols of solidarity. Social media lit up again, this time not with fire but with beacons, porch lamps switched on, lanterns set on windowsills, candles glowing in kitchens. Each post carried the same words, "The light of many hands." Standing on that porch, my son's hand tucked into mine, I felt the truth settle deep in my chest. The fire had taken much, but it had not taken the spirit of people. The blaze had destroyed walls, but it had sparked something stronger, connection. I whispered to him, "This house will keep us warm, but it's the people who keep us alive." He nodded, his young face lit by the glow, and I knew he understood. That light did not belong to me. It belonged to every hand that had held a hammer, to every heart that had sent prayers. To every stranger who had seen a piece of themselves in our story. It became a flame that no wildfire could ever burn away. And as I looked at the horizon, I realized, sometimes the smallest light is enough to remind the world that darkness never wins. When I look back now, I don't just remember the night of the fire. I remember the nights that followed, the laughter of strangers turned friends, the sound of hammers echoing like heartbeats, the glow of a porch light that refused to fade. I once thought the most important decision of my life was whether to drive into that fire the first time and then the second. But I've come to see the truth. The greatest choice I made wasn't mine alone. It was the choice of hundreds, people who decided that my family's story mattered enough to become their own. And because of them, my son will grow up not just remembering flames, but remembering how quickly the world came running when we needed it most. The porch light still shines each evening, steady as a heartbeat. It doesn't simply mark the doorway of a rebuilt home. It is a lantern for anyone passing by, a reminder that even when darkness seems absolute, the glow of kindness can reach further than fire ever could. That light belongs to everyone who believed, to every neighbor, every volunteer, every stranger who shared, prayed, or picked up a hammer. It is proof that sacrifice does not end in ashes. When shared, it becomes a fire that warms, not burns. If this story belongs to me at all, it is only because I was the one behind the wheel. But in truth, it belongs to all of us, to every parent who has chosen love over fear, to every hand that has lifted another from the ground, to every soul who refuses to let despair win. And so, from my porch, lit not by electricity alone but by the hearts of many, I leave you with this. May you carry light wherever you go. May your homes be filled with laughter, your families with love, and your days with the kind of hope that no fire can consume. Thank you, dear listeners, for sharing this journey with me. From my family to yours, I wish you good health, strong hearts, and the simple joy of gathering around the light of your own home. Twisted Roots thanks you for being here. If this story touched you, I invite you to stay, to listen, to share, because stories like this only live as long as they are carried in the hearts of many.